is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Matilli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. A visit to the volatile demilitarized zone separating the two Koreas. The U.S. Defense Secretary set to discuss American troop deployments and nuclear-powered submarines at annual security talks tomorrow in Seoul. Now, China denies claims by President Trump that it secretly tested nuclear weapons, insisting it has a no first-use policy and remains committed to its ban on nuclear testing. Now, Japan's Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi reaching out to North Korea, offering a summit with leader Kim Jong-un to resolve the decades-old issue of abductions of Japanese citizens. And China's factory activity expands in October, but at a slower pace as new orders waned on tariff anxiety. Ahead on a bulletin, a canal under construction in Cambodia with the help of China, big enough to shift economic growth. How can it benefit investors who have already established a presence in the country? And stellar performances by LA Dodgers players Yoshinobu Yamamoto and Shohei Ohtani in the World Series strike a home run in their home country of Japan. One newspaper calls it a golden age for Japanese baseball. A U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is in South Korea for a two-day visit, with annual security talks scheduled for Tuesday. Now, Mr. Hegseth and his South Korean counterpart reaffirmed the strong combined defense posture between the two sides during a visit to the demilitarized zone that divides the two Koreas. CNA's senior correspondent Lim Yun-suk has more.
U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is in South Korea for 2 days, his first trip to the country since taking office earlier this year. It also marks his first visit to the demilitarized zone separating the two Koreas. The joint security area is where representatives from the United Nations Command, including the U.S. and North Korea, negotiated the armistice that technically ended the Korean War in 1953. But the border remains tense as a formal peace treaty was never signed to officially end the three-year conflict. A trip to the DMZ by Mr. Hegseth and South Korea's Defense Minister Ang Gi-baek is seen as a symbolic message to North Korea, underscoring the two countries' commitment to combined defense readiness against Pyongyang's growing nuclear and missile threat. Mr. Hegseth's visit to Camp Humphreys, the sprawling U.S. military base in Pyeongtaek, where most American troops in South Korea are stationed, will also be significant. The presence of U.S. troops serves as a reminder to North Korea that the alliance stands firm. Central to Mr. Hegseth's visit will be the annual Security Consultative Meeting, or SCM talks, where the two defense chiefs are expected to discuss several issues, including how the U.S. could reshape the role of its forces in South Korea. The 28,500 U.S. troops here could be given a more flexible role, addressing not only threats from North Korea, but also wider security challenges in the Indo-Pacific. South Korea, meanwhile, is seeking to assume a greater role in its own defense, including the eventual transfer of wartime operational control from Washington to Seoul. Also on the agenda could be the ongoing discussions over South Korea's plan to build nuclear-powered submarines, seen as crucial to bolstering deterrence against North Korea's advancing capabilities. After meeting South Korean President Lee Jae-myung on the sidelines of the APEC summit last week, U.S. President Donald Trump said Washington would allow South Korea to develop a nuclear-powered submarine to be built in the U.S. using South Korean technology. Experts in Seoul say this is likely to come up at Tuesday's SCM meeting, given its strategic importance for South Korea.
NPT 문제라든지 또 어디서 건조를 할지 그다음에 핵연료를 어떻게 공수를 할지 이런 디테일 부분에서 어떻게 실무급으로 이제 협의가 되느냐에 따라서 이제 추진이 어느 정도 시간이 소요되고 또 그 비용이 소요되는지는.
Mr. Hegseth will depart South Korea on Tuesday, the final stop in his Asian tour, which has included Japan, Malaysia, and Vietnam. Lim Yun-suk, CNA, Seoul.
And for more insights on Seoul's plan for building a nuclear submarine, we'll be chatting with Associate Professor Jeffrey Robertson from Yonsei University a little later this hour. Now, Japan's new Prime Minister, Sanae Takaichi, has reached out to North Korea, expressing her willingness to hold a bilateral summit over the kidnapping of 17 Japanese nationals more than 40 years ago. Her comments came during a government assembly focused on securing the victims' return. It echoes a pledge made last Thursday when she met with families of those abducted. Ms. Takaichi vowed to, quote, find a breakthrough no matter what, and that includes a meeting with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Both countries have no official diplomatic ties, with this issue playing a large role in their frosty relations. Well, they're not in agreement over the number of victims kidnapped. Japan claims 12 out of the original 17 abductees are still being held in North Korea. Pyongyang, however, claims 8 of the 12 have died and that the remaining 4 never entered its territory. And North Korea returned 5 abductees to Japan in 2002. Now, in other news, China has denied that it had experimented with nuclear weapons after U.S. President Donald Trump claimed that Beijing was among those to have conducted secret underground tests.
中国始终坚持走和平发展道路，奉行不首先使用核武器的政策，坚持自卫防御的核战略，恪守暂停核试验的承诺。
In an interview with CBS's 60 Minutes, Mr. Trump justified his decision to return to nuclear testing by saying that China, Russia, North Korea, and Pakistan are all testing their arsenals. No country other than North Korea is known to have conducted a nuclear detonation for decades. But Mr. Trump says countries are doing the tests secretly, way underground. Still, it's not clear if this means the U.S. will be conducting its first nuclear explosion since 1992. The Energy Secretary downplayed those plans, saying what's being discussed now are systems tests, not detonations. The U.S. is a signatory to the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty that bans all explosion testing for military and civilian purposes. Well, the U.S. president has also ruled out any possibility of NVIDIA's top AI chips reaching the hands of non-American companies. Donald Trump's remarks suggest that the most sophisticated semiconductors will be kept away from China and potentially the rest of the world.
NVIDIA is really just a brilliant company. The chips are 10 years. The new Blackwell that just came out, it's 10 years ahead of every other chip. But there's nothing to beat with other than say, congratulations. But no, we don't give that chip to other people.
The latest comments throwing a deal with South Korea into question. NVIDIA announced last week that it will supply more than 260,000 Blackwell chips to the U.S. ally and some of its biggest firms, including Samsung Electronics. Also in doubt, the Trump administration's plan unveiled in July to vastly expand AI exports to allies to maintain an edge over China in a critical technology. Well, separately, Mr. Trump says China has given him assurances that it would not move against Taiwan while he's in office, even though he said the issue was not raised in last week's summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Mr. Trump says that Mr. Xi understands the consequences of any action on Taiwan, but did not provide details on what that would mean. China has yet to comment on Mr. Trump's remarks. Beijing also considers the island a renegade province and has vowed reunification by force if necessary. Over the weekend, China's Defense Minister Dong Jin urged Washington to be cautious with its words while speaking at the ASEAN Defense Ministers meeting. Admiral Dong met U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth in Kuala Lumpur. Now, Mr. Hegseth said that both agreed they should set up military-to-military channels to deconflict and de-escalate any problems that may arise. Washington has previously said it's opposed to any attempt to take the self-governed territory by force and is committed to supplying it with arms to defend itself. Earlier, we spoke with Alex Capri, senior lecturer at NUS Business School, and he weighed in on where U.S.-China relations stand following talks between Presidents Trump and Xi in South Korea last week.
The great power rivalry between the United States and China in particular is a systemic, existential issue And that's not going away. So the world is sort of struggling with, it's grappling with this paradox, right? How do we look for ways to increase trade and investment while at the same time trying to diffuse things like export controls and, of course, as you mentioned, the military side of things. So China has the rare earths, critical minerals choke point, if you will. While the U.S. continues to have the chip, right, the chip war, the value chain choke points around things like manufacturing equipment, et cetera. Those are two indispensable elements of the global supply chain. And both Beijing and Washington have realized that if those elements are weaponized too much, there's going to be a lot of collateral damage. At the same time, I think this is a buying time kind of strategy, particularly for China. China has doubled down on its efforts to create its own indigenous industry across all strategic sectors. Of course, we're seeing the reshoring happening around rare earths and critical minerals back to the United States, Australia, et cetera. So I do think that this truce, if you will, or this de-escalation that we're seeing, it's a temporary thing. It's a smaller element in a much larger existential competition that's going to continue.
All right, coming up next on East Asia tonight, Japanese automakers show off what the future of transport can possibly look like at the Japan Mobility Show. And Chinese gold jewelers set to be the hardest hit by the end of a long-standing tax break. Hello again. You're watching East Asia tonight, and we've got Roland Lim standing by with the very latest in business news. So, Roland, it looks like all these Asia's factories hitting a rough patch, with those U.S. tariffs, China especially. Yep, Asian factories definitely feeling the squeeze. Private surveys showing fewer new orders and less confidence about the future. It's a tough time for these manufacturers. Now, manufacturing activity in China, disappointing forecast, but coming in slightly above the 50 level, separating expansion and contraction. The loss of momentum from the previous month likely due to a drop in new orders, which fell at its quickest pace since May. The data also giving weight to suspicions that the rush to get exports out ahead of the U.S. tariffs may be over. New export orders in South Korea declining from the previous month as well. That dragged the PMI gauge of the export-reliant economy below the 50 level into contraction. Now, Taiwan's factory activity too stuck in contraction for the 8th consecutive month, although it improved slightly from the previous month on softer declines in new orders. Hong Kong officials are aiming to make cross-border remittances easier, building a shared scalable AI infrastructure and a boost to tokenization, all within 5 years. Now, they've outlined the goals during the city's main fintech event. Tokenization, of course, refers to the conversion of real-world assets like bonds or funds into digital tokens that can trade on secure blockchain platforms.
We see tokenization not just as a technological leap, but also an important additional channel for our financial infrastructure, where bonds can settle in seconds, trade finance can move with real-time data, and cross-border investment can flow seamlessly.
Mr. Eddie Yu was speaking at the Hong Kong FinTech Week, its 10th edition this year. Now, Hong Kong launched a licensing regime for stable coins in August as part of its broader push to become a cryptocurrency hub. According to a Financial Times report, major Chinese firms like JD.com and Ant Group were planning to apply for a stablecoin license in the city, but halted plans after Beijing warned of risks. The report cited people familiar with the matter. Now, Ant Group didn't address this matter at the event, but in a panel discussion, its chairman, Eric Ting, emphasized Hong Kong's value as a springboard for Chinese firms.
They have world-leading financial systems. They have outstanding professional services and have a pool of their tenants with global insights, global knowledge. So this is really a very critical hub for China company to go global via Hong Kong. So and have been invested heavily in Hong Kong. And the group will also develop a suite of their product services to help Chinese companies go global.
With a talent race emerging as US and China go head-to-head in tech, well, the spotlight is on Hong Kong's talent admission schemes, which came under scrutiny for its lack of diversity. For the first half of this year, nearly 95% of approved applicants are from the mainland. But schools like Hong Kong Baptist University are expanding outreach globally through scholarships.
There are still a lot of opportunities in this space, not just for finding a job, but many of our students are also thinking of starting their own companies. The Hong Kong government has been very clear that no, we're going to not just experiment, but we are going to place a bet, a substantial bet, into this space here in Hong Kong.
Other stories on our radar: Huawei's EV Partner series raising nearly $2 billion ahead of its debut on the Hong Kong exchange this Wednesday. Our series listing will be the 8th exceeding $1 billion in Hong Kong this year. Territories Exchange is experiencing a bumper crop of blockbuster IPOs, with cumulative proceeds already exceeding the year's forecast of $26 billion. BYD has fallen to second place in the Chinese market after back-to-back drop in sales. Now, October sales fell 12% on year, but a sign of concern, as it's also BYD's best month this year. A crackdown on excessive discounts putting a wrench into the automaker's key sale tactic. Rivals Geely, NIO and Xpeng, however, maintaining their ascent, reporting record sales last month. Japan's automakers are showing off their latest technology and models at the country's largest motor and mobility show in Tokyo. But U.S. tariffs are casting a shadow over the outlook for this crucial sector. CNA's senior correspondent Michio Ishida has more.
The future of transport on display at Japan Mobility Show. Honda's president rode a robotic chair to showcase its new electric vehicles.
今年のホンダブースには陸、海、空、そして宇宙に至るまで幅広いモビリティを揃えました。
Ailing automaker Nissan unveiled a lineup of refreshed models.
We have refocused on what makes us unique, redefining our approach to better serve customers.
And the world's biggest automaker, Toyota, promoted mobility for a wide range for users, including self-driving prototypes for children and walking chairs for people with physical disabilities.
車の未来を変えていこう。この思いを力に変えて、これからもトヨタグループのみんなで発明に挑戦し続けていきたいと思います。
The auto sector is a core industry for Japan's economy. It has 10 domestic car manufacturers, and as of December 2024, more than 68,000 related firms, employing 4.36 million workers, based on reports by private research institute Teikoku Data Bank. The U.S. is its most important market, accounting for about 32% of exports as of 2024, according to the Japan Automobile Manufacturers Association. But in April this year, U.S. President Donald Trump imposed new tariffs on imported Japanese cars, adding an extra 25% duty to the existing 2.5%, before settling on a 15% rate in September. Reports say these could shave about $13 billion off the automaker's annual operating profits. Some, like Toyota, are absorbing the increased cost. Toyota forecasts its net profit could nearly halve this fiscal year. That's despite achieving a record 4.7% growth in global sales in the first half and a jump in sales to the U.S. compared to a year earlier. Still, some analysts are upbeat on its prospects.
Toyota has a long-term view. That's why Toyota didn't give up ICE technologies, hybrid technologies.
But Mr. Nakanishi says some mid-sized car makers are struggling as challenges mount.
A lot of competition coming from traditional OEMs and also new competition coming from the emerging Chinese OEMs and also a company like a Tesla. So the middle-sized company, that is Honda, Nissan, I think that they really need to find a new breakthrough in order to survive in this industry.
Nissan, whose merger talks with Honda collapsed earlier this year, expects an annual operating loss of about $1.8 billion this fiscal year, weighed down by U.S. tariffs. Top executives from some car makers such as Nissan and Toyota are now considering importing their U.S.-built cars to Japan in a move aimed at reducing trade frictions. American cars account for only a fraction of new auto sales in Japan and were absent from the mobility show. More than 500 exhibitors are participating in this year's show, which takes place till November 9th. Michio Ishida, CNA, Tokyo.
Gold jewelry retailers in Greater China sliding as the sector digests the end of a long-standing government tax rebate on the precious metal. Now, Chow Tai Fook Jewelry, the biggest loser for the day, down 8.7%, followed by Lao Pu Gold, more than 7% in the red. Chow Sang Sang also down by 6%. Beijing announced the revisions over the weekend. Now, effective from November 1st, non-member and members of the Shanghai Gold Exchange, Shanghai Futures Exchange, will only be allowed to offset 6% of the input value of value-added tax when selling non-investment gold products to consumers. Now, that includes jewelry or industrial applications like electronics. Most Chinese retailers had been able to deduct 13% previously. Now, the tax incentive will remain in place for exchange members who intend to sell gold as investment products, such as gold bars. The new policy will remain in place until the end of 2027.
Well, gold always a hot topic and plenty to unpack. So let's discuss more about the change in China's gold tax incentive. Roland Lim with us in the hot seat. So let's talk about some of the big names, right? We've got Chow Tai Fook, Lao Pu Gold shares are all down. So Roland, what's going on there?
Well, it's about the costs, right? I mean, retailers used to be able to claim a bigger tax credit. Now they can't. Well, there's only two things they can do. Either they absorb the cost, that will affect their margins, or they pass that cost on to consumers.
Okay, so then who's going to be feeling the most pain?
It would be the smaller stores, I'm afraid. I mean, the big chains have scale. They can hedge longer. They have better or smarter buying power in the sense that because they buy more in bulk. And of course, they can also tweak prices across their hundreds of stores across the mainland. The smaller shops, well, they can only maybe, maybe hold on to their market share, I would say, maybe, but they'll definitely be feeling the pinch.
And does it also, I mean, the new rule, does it affect only jewelry?
Mostly jewelry, but also the changes also touches on gold bars and gold coins. So unless you are a bank, an institution, or a refiner, then you are still exempt from 13. Well, you still have that 13% discount from the tax rebate. But if not, then it's now the new rule, which is 7% less.
Mm-hmm. And also, how does this decision, I guess the bottom line is, how does it change China's gold industry as a whole?
Well, three things are about to happen here. First of all, there will be the tightening of the margin. So you're going to expect prices to go up at the counter, especially on the higher purity pieces. The second thing that's going to happen is that the market share is going to get more concentrated. The bigger players, they're going to be winning more market share. And the mom and pop shops, well, they'll be lucky if they are actually able to survive and able to pay their staff members. And then the third thing, of course, is that the demand mix will shift. That means to say that the people who want to buy gold, they'll still be going to the shops to buy it, but they're going to be buying less of it because the prices are higher.
All right. And prices of gold this holiday season, if, say, you intend to buy a gift in China, what do you suggest?
Well, if you're a shopper in China, then you have to buy. Well, expect the sticker prices to be slightly higher. But if you're talking about gold as an asset, well, keep an eye on the spot prices between the London and the Shanghai exchanges, because if there is a premium or a discount, that shows whether there's movement in demand of gold. So you want to keep checking in on the retailers and the prices that they put there. If they keep adjusting their price tags, well, that means that they are actually either passing on that cost to you, or they are actually taking a hit because they don't have enough business.
All right. Well, thanks for that tip, Roland. On that note, we are going to zip out for a short break now, but coming up on East Asia tonight, U.S. President Donald Trump giving the green light for a nuclear submarine for Seoul, with possible implications for the region and beyond. We'll be getting insights with an expert in just a moment. China says it's facing agricultural espionage as it points its finger at foreign intelligence agencies. Hello there, this is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is in South Korea for a 2-day visit, with annual security talks scheduled for Tuesday. Both sides reaffirming the strength of their joint defense posture during a visit to the demilitarized zone that divides the two Koreas. Japan's new Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi has reached out to North Korea, saying she wants a bilateral summit with leader Kim Jong-un to discuss the kidnapping of 17 Japanese nationals more than 40 years ago. And a private survey shows China's factory activity in October expanded at a slower pace compared to September, dragged down by a sharper drop in new export orders as trade tensions with the U.S. intensified. U.S. President Donald Trump's approval of a nuclear submarine for South Korea came as a surprise to strategic and non-proliferation groups alike. The American leader announced the decision on his Truth social account after his Wednesday meeting with South Korean President Lee Jae-myung on grounds that the two nations' military alliance is stronger than ever before. Now, the move admits Seoul into an exclusive club of nations to possess such vessels, which can technically stay underwater for far longer compared to their diesel-operated counterparts, and is only limited by its food supply. Well, Mr. Trump, in a separate post, said that the nuclear submarine will be built in Philadelphia at a commercial yard bought by South Korean company Hanwha last year. A shipmaker which recently found itself in the crosshairs of China for aiding U.S. investigations has the experience, having built 17 of the 23 submarines delivered to the South Korean Navy. But for now, details remain fuzzy. Some questions haven't been answered, such as how Seoul's nuclear submarine program will look like and how the shipyard will be prepped to build military vessels, as well as handle nuclear material. And perhaps, most crucial of all, whether any technology transfer will take place. Well, for more insights into this development and the possible impact on the region, we are joined now by Jeffrey Robertson, Associate Professor of Diplomatic Studies at Yonsei University, and he is speaking to us from Seoul. Good to have you on the bulletin, Professor. Let's just first up talk about the big picture. I mean, the logic behind this nuclear submarine deal. It sounds like a bold deal, but given Trump's transactional style and the lack of congressional approval at this point, how realistic or sustainable do you think this deal really is?
Well, that's the first thing we have to think about, whether this is an actual deal which will continue and be sustainable into the future, or whether it is a deal like many of Trump's deals, particularly the trade deals. It can change and it can transform as Trump speaks to different people, or as Trump changes his mind for any reason. So, it's probably a little bit too early to celebrate.
So let's just talk about how Seoul may actually be playing this game on its own terms, because some are arguing that this isn't about, whether Washington will keep its word, but whether Seoul has actually made it impossible for the U.S. To walk away. I'm just curious to know, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, if we think about the situation of the recent conferences, so we've had the APEC and we've had, we can basically call it Trumpec over the weekend as well. And in Trumpec, South Korea did incredibly well. It not only secured a finalization of its trade deal with the United States, but it secured that submarine decision. And for South Korea, that's something they've been pushing for a very long period. It's part of a long-term program to increase its capacity for independent action. So South Korea has increased its missile range, it's increased its missile payload, it's started to launch its own intelligence gathering satellites. South Korea is becoming a very significant player step by step. And a lot of that has involved removing the restrictions which the United States placed on it over its history. And there's basically only one more constraint which catches the public eye, and that's the lack of a full nuclear fuel cycle. And a lot of people will be focusing on that one into the future, and it's going to be on the agenda in the not too distant future.
Well, there's a lot of talk about how this compares to other defense pacts, especially AUKUS. So by extending this nuclear propulsion coordination with South Korea, would you say that the U.S. is effectively expanding AUKUS into East Asia? And could that possibly tempt other non-nuclear states, like Japan, for instance, to also seek similar capabilities?
Well, as long as they don't call it caucus, it'll be okay. Listen, AUKUS is in a situation where whether Australia actually secures nuclear submarines or not is very much under question. There's a big difference between the two capacities of Australia versus South Korea to secure a nuclear submarine. Australia has no indigenous submarine program. It has no indigenous nuclear energy program. South Korea has both, has a very advanced submarine program. In fact, its most recent batch 2 of the KS-3 submarines are considered to be some of the best diesel submarines in the globe. And other states are looking at them and wanting those submarines. Canada's in negotiations to secure Korean submarines. It would make sense for Australia to actually decide upon getting South Korean submarines as well. And I can guarantee you, if Australia decided to get nuclear submarines off South Korea, they'd probably get them sooner than they'll get submarines out of AUKUS.
That would be an interesting development if that happens. So then, do you see a new kind of competition emerging among U.S. allies, even as, Seoul, itself, they just insisted in a newsline that it's not fueling an arms race?
Well, if we look at it from a US perspective, a strategic rationale of why you'd want South Korea and Australia to have nuclear submarines, those two smaller players having nuclear submarines adds to the balance on the US side vis-a-vis China. And I'm sure there's some people in the United States who hope that South Korea will present a threat to China in much the same way as North Korea today presents a direct threat to the United States. I'm sure there's hopes there, but I think a lot of people don't realize that South Korea securing all this capacity for independent action doesn't necessarily go down the path of it being a tool of the United States. It may also go down the path of South Korea becoming an armed, independent state. And that's something a lot of people in South Korea's political system are probably hoping for.
And of course, one player that's watching all of this very closely would be China. China's always been wary of AUKUS from the get-go. How do you think, China is reading its latest move? And do you suppose that that's going to accelerate China's own drive for self-sufficiency in shipbuilding and undersea technology, that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's certainly going to be of concern to China. That being said, as I mentioned, South Korea getting greater independence and greater capacity to act independently, potentially in the medium to long term, leads to the United States leaving the Korean Peninsula. And that's not of all that much concern to China. In fact, I'm pretty sure China would be pretty happy about that. So, if it does go down that path and there's potential for it, then China's not going to be too displeased.
So just looking ahead with U.S. backing, what are some of the milestones? What should we be looking out for to know that this deal is truly on track, or whether, it was just sort of like a symbolic move?
It's going to be hard to just call it a symbolic move. So there is a lot of current planning going on in the United States regarding its strategic position. But after the Trump administration, we're going to be able to determine whether this will really be a serious plan or not. I mean, anything with the Trump administration, it's very hard to say whether there is any sustainability in any policy move. But if we see that it continues past the Trump administration, and perhaps if there is a third Trump administration, if it continues, well, then we'll have a much clearer sign of what's happening.
All right. Many thanks for your insight, helping us unpack this all. Jeffrey Robertson, Associate Professor of Diplomatic Studies at Yonsei University. Now, in other news, Pakistan's Navy says it expects its first Chinese-designed submarine to enter service as early as next year. Pakistani Naval Chief Admiral Naveed Ashraf, speaking to China's state-run Global Times, said that Chinese equipment is well-suited to the Navy's operational requirements and that Islamabad is looking to further collaborate with China on emerging military technologies in areas such as unmanned systems, artificial intelligence, and electronic warfare systems. Islamabad will eventually take delivery of 8 Hangar-class vessels by 2028 in a deal reportedly worth up to $5 billion, adding to the country's ability to patrol regional waters. 4 of the diesel-electric-powered vessels will be made in China, with the remaining to be assembled in Pakistan. Now, the South Asian country is the largest buyer of Chinese-made weapons. Military think tank SIPRI said this year that some 80% of arms imported by Islamabad from 2020 to 2024 comes from China, while accounting for more than 60% of Chinese exports during that time. Notably, Pakistan, in their 4-day-long conflict with India earlier in May, if you recall, said that its Air Force used Chinese-made J-10 fighters to shoot down Indian Air Force jets. China says that the country's food security is under threat amid alleged efforts by foreign intelligence agencies to obtain what it calls illegal means, the genetic data and seed resources from the grain sector. The Ministry of State Security said in its WeChat account post that such moves have targeted crops such as soybeans, corn and rice. Authorities cited 2 cases in which a Chinese national was jailed for selling so-called parental seeds, which are first-generation seeds used to produce crop hybrids. Such grains are not allowed for export, but they were sold to a foreign entity and hidden in containers bound for export. A separate incident involved foreign consular staff and experts from an unnamed country. Authorities say they had conducted field surveys for data such as crop yields and reserves, while utilizing what the ministry described as counter-surveillance tactics, such as vehicle switching and traveling on rural roads to avoid detection. Time now for another break, but coming up on East Asia tonight, Cambodia providing Chinese investors with an investment highway in the form of a waterway connecting the Mekong River to the Gulf of Thailand. Plus, Japan revels in the international recognition of its place in baseball after Shohei Ohtani and Yoshinobu Yamamoto carried the Dodgers to a World Series win. Record high gold prices have delivered a windfall for Australia's mining sector. But it's not only big miners that are benefiting from the bling. Small investors and prospectors are also hitting pay dirt. Roger Maynard has this report.
A new Australian gold rush is returning to historic mining towns and city streets. Everyone, it seems, wants their share of the precious metal, which has risen in value by more than 50% over the past year. Here in Sydney's CBD, dozens line up outside this bullion shop for hours in the hope of making a small fortune, now or in the future. Some are buying, others are selling. Hundreds of kilometres away in the Great Dividing Range, prospectors are digging.
Do the digging in the hard yards.
If there's gold in them there hills, Job Drinkwater will discover it.
And as you can see, I found a pretty nice bit of colour there, as the locals would say. Just a good dozen little specks. So I could set up camp here all day, bring the dog and a barbecue down, and maybe at the end of the day have a fair bit of good gold to have in the pan and in my pocket as well.
The Great Australian Gold Rush began in the mid-1800s, attracting prospectors from all over the world to New South Wales and places like Hill End. Today, little remains of those times, but there's no escaping the past. On the outskirts of Hill End, the cemetery bears testimony to some of the many thousands of people who once lived and died here in the search for riches. Tombstones offer poignant reminders of the families who sacrificed their lives in the hope of finding a golden nugget. Sadly, most failed. As Hill End's general store owner Jim Rutherford points out, the real money was to be made in selling picks and spades, and it still applies.
The only way to guarantee success in a gold rush is to sell shovels. And the modern version of shovels is water, pans and coffee.
The latest gold rush has created a run on pans in Hill End. Temporarily out of stock of prospecting paraphernalia, Jim relies on selling coffee and food supplies to new arrivals. Like Jim, people like Job Drinkwater, who's lived in Hill End all his life, never give up. He also makes a living sharing his skills with newcomers and even has his own social media channel. But of one thing, Job is certain. There's plenty of gold just waiting to be dug up.
People think that it's not out there to be found. Down here is a really good spot to perfect your skill. Because if you're washing up tiny specks like that, that means when you are out in the field on a good patch, you're going to wash up some really good gold because your skill is certified.
Back in the city, it seems jewellery lovers never tire of gold either, regardless of the price. Nick Chironi runs a high-end jewellery manufacturing business and retail outlet in Sydney.
Gold never loses its prestige, and people love gold because they feel safer with gold, much more than any other metal. And I think it's because, I don't know, because of the colour, because of the flexibility of gold. It's a pliable, it's a metal that you can, play with it much easier.
Right now, playing with gold in all its forms is creating another Aussie gold rush, one that requires both long-term optimism and a little patience in the queue of hopefuls waiting to buy or sell their way to a fortune. Roger Maynard, CNA, Sydney.
Cambodia is constructing one of its biggest ever waterway projects, the Funan Techno Canal, with the help of China. The 180-kilometre waterway, with a completion date of 2028, will connect the Mekong River to the Gulf of Thailand. Insight, CNA's weekly current affairs program, explores what this mega canal would mean for China-Cambodia relations and Chinese investors in Cambodia.
In August last year, Prime Minister Hun Manet launched a groundbreaking ceremony for the Funan Techno Canal. It's estimated to cost $1.7 billion, nearly 4% of the country's annual gross domestic product. And China has agreed to foot some of the bill. This April, during Chinese President Xi Jinping's state visit to the kingdom, an agreement was signed to fund the project. It will be a public-private partnership, where Cambodian investors will own a majority 51% equity stake, while Chinese investors will hold 49%.
Cambodia and China is the comprehensive strategic partnership, and we are good friends. So both sides always work together very closely. We have to work with all the partners that can push this project to complete.
For more than a decade, China has been Cambodia's largest source of foreign investment and top trading partner.
这款是男装双份船的，它的销量是非常好。今年我们做了有7万多件，那每天的产能，我们一条线可以做450件左右。
Here in Takeo Province, Chinese garment manufacturer Changshu Goldway Textile produces a wide variety of clothing, such as jackets and pants, on its dozen production lines. About 90% of garment-making factories in the kingdom are owned by the Chinese.
我们每天的产量基本在6000件左右，那每个月基本在15万件左右。客户基本是欧洲、美国、日本。
The Jiangsu-based company saw an opportunity to set up shop in Cambodia back in 2013.
那因为国内的用工比较紧张，柬埔寨有大量的人力市场资源，再加上国际政策的变化和发展，所以我们就选择来柬埔寨进行投资开厂。
At this factory, about 90% of the workers are Cambodians and 10% are Chinese.
从目前的市场看呢，柬埔寨还是有一定的优势。第一个，政治比较稳定；第二个，国家的发展给我们后期的工厂发展匹配，有很多的发展空间。
Recently, in 2022, the Chinese garment firm purchased land for expansion. The company expects the Funan Techo Canal project to help drive growth.
第一个，从运输的时间上来说，会缩短一定的周期。那每一个环节基本会缩短3天左右的时间。那出口的产品可能会缩短1个星期。那么从成本上来说，它不需要再从越南转口，那我们的成本也会下降。那我们会把下降的成本回报于客人，回报于国家。
The Funan Techo Canal will be constructed using a build, operate, transfer model. The Chinese company that's developing the canal will have the right to operate and profit from it.
So it is like a kind of giving privilege to the private company to construct it, operate it, and like a toll gate as well. They can get the fee of transportation. And after they earn their money, in some period of time, they just transfer all to Cambodian government.
You can catch the Insight episode, Cambodia's Canal Controversy, on CNA Video on Demand or CNA Insider's YouTube page. A win for the LA Dodgers against Toronto's Blue Jays had reverberations on the other side of the world, in Japan. Shohei Ohtani and Yoshinobu Yamamoto played starring roles to help the Dodgers clinch back-to-back World Series championships. It was a thrilling 5-4 extra innings victory that saw Yamamoto named the baseball series Most Valuable Player. The 27-year-old pitcher guided the Dodgers in a decisive Game 7, emerging from the bullpen less than 24 hours after throwing 96 pitches in Game 6. An incredible feat that defied baseball convention, given that elite pitchers are normally granted a week of rest after high-duty situations. A major Japanese newspapers hailing the players, including Roki Sasaki, for the Dodgers becoming the first team in 25 years to win successive World Series. One paper called this the golden age for Japanese baseball. Even Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi, a big baseball fan, chimed in, congratulated the players while expressing hope the Japanese athletes continue to thrive on the world stage. Baseball has also been used as a diplomatic tool in U.S. relations, seen in Ms. Takaichi's first bilateral meeting with President Trump in Tokyo. While she may not share the same love for golf, both leaders caught a glimpse of the World Series before starting formal talks. And that wraps up this Monday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Thanks for watching.